Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us here for the Pennsylvania Policy Center's Policy Action Zoom meeting. My name is Jeff Garris. I am the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. Very grateful to my colleague, Adrian Stanley, who is our Digital Comms Associate Director, who is helping us with the tech today. So if you're having any problems seeing or hearing anything or any issues with the Zoom, feel free to send a message in the chat to Adrian. Adrian will be glad to help with that. Speaking of some instructions, so you may have noticed already all of your lines are muted. We've done that so that we'll be able to hear all of our presenters today. We're really excited to have a great lineup. We want to make sure that folks are able to hear everything they have to say. We do want to have an opportunity for people to ask questions. So if you have a question at any point in this discussion, feel free to drop it in the chat. I will be taking some of these questions and posing them, as many as we can, to the folks we have joining us today. And we do have quite a lineup today, and we're very excited about it. Now, as you noticed, this is the second Thursday of the month, and we typically do these state policy action Zoom meetings on the third Thursday. Next Thursday, June 19th, is Juneteenth. We will be closed that day in observance of the holiday. We encourage all of you to observe Juneteenth as well. So we're doing this a little bit earlier. And we're also doing a little bit earlier. This is the second Thursday because this is the big month for the state budget. Under Pennsylvania's Constitution, one of the very few things that the General Assembly is actually required to do is to pass a balanced budget. That means expenditures and income match up. We don't spend more than we take in, at least theoretically. And that budget needs to be approved and put into place in conjunction with the governor by the start of the state's fiscal year. The start of the state's fiscal year is on July 1st. So we are just in the final couple of weeks here of the 2024-2025 fiscal year for the state budget. We are anxiously watching to see what's going on in Harrisburg, because the decisions that they make are not just, cold, lifeless numbers. This budget really will affect the lives of almost everyone in Pennsylvania. Virtually all of us will be affected by the budget in ways that could be positive, in ways that could be negative. We have a lot of priorities that we want to see funded in our state budget. We're going to be talking about those today. Our guests include our executive director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center, Mark Steer. You'll be hearing a little bit from him about revenue and about how we fund these things. From there, we will be going to Susan Spicka, who is our friend and the executive director at Education Voters of Pennsylvania. Susan will be talking a little bit about what's at stake in our schools across Pennsylvania. Following Susan, we're going to then hear from Connor Descheemaker. They will be talking about the issues around public transit funding. And there's a lot at stake all across Pennsylvania as transit agencies wrestle with the challenges of getting people where they need to be. And our final speaker today then will be Gillian. Gillian will be speaking to us from Better Pennsylvania. Gillian Kratzer is the deputy director there at Better Pennsylvania. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and our boss here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center, Mark Steer. Mark?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all of you for being here today. We are holding this meeting to focus on the priorities we believe Pennsylvania should adopt in the budget that begins on July 1st. I'm going to put in the chat right now a short piece that we are releasing today that focuses on our three key priorities, which are K-12 funding, raising the minimum wage, and transit funding. We're going to hear from experts in all three of these areas in a minute, but before we do so, I want to address one question that is being talked about in Harrisburg and should be understood widely in our state. The objection to the two spending proposals of the three I mentioned, transit funding and K-12 education, that's coming almost entirely from Republicans, is that the state does not have the revenue to pay for this spending. And the people who make those objections point out rightly that last year and the year before, the state spent more than it brought in revenues during that current year, or during this current year. That is true. For a number of reasons, however, we do not think that this is a reason to reject K-12 funding or transit funding. As our guest will explain, K-12 funding is constitutionally mandated and morally required, and transit funding is absolutely critical to the economy of the state. We believe that if we don't meet the minimum requirement to keep SEPTA, PRT, and the other 30 or 40 transit agencies across the state in business, the state will lose far more revenue than it will be spending in supporting these agencies. But there are other things to consider about the budget and about the revenue needed to sustain this budget, and I want to mention them quickly. Number one, we estimate the state will have at least $11 billion in surplus at the start of the fiscal year on July 1st. That includes both the rainy day fund and the general fund surplus. That's more than enough to fund the proposals we're discussing here, as well as the rest of the budget. Second, as I mentioned, regardless of whether we have that funding or not, we have got to make the investments in K-12 education and public transit. They're morally, constitutionally, and economically required. Third, there are some revenue options that the governor's proposed that are already being discussed. As a matter of public philosophy, we don't really approve of relying on revenue from legalizing and taxing games of chance because those taxes are highly regressive. But we've gone so far down this road already, and video games of chance are already so prevalent and unregulated that we think a reasonable tax on them is justified. Such a tax would raise about $700 million a year. And fourth, a year after Senate Republicans passed a $3 billion per year cut in the personal income tax and other cuts, and when they continue talking about accelerating corporate tax cuts, it's really disingenuous of them to say we have no ability to pay for constitutionally mandated funding for K-12 education or necessary funding for public transit. As we keep reminding both parties, when it comes to revenue for the state of Pennsylvania, the first order of business is to do no harm. There's no justification for accelerating corporate tax cuts right now or any other tax cuts that aren't directed to helping working people. Having said all this, I just want to say one last thing. The state is likely to face a fiscal cliff in just over 2 years, as our huge surpluses to dwindle to cover the gap between current year revenues and current year spending. In the past, we've called for the General Assembly to start addressing this issue by raising some revenues in a progressive fashion, both to put off the fiscal cliff and to make our upside-down tax system fair. Both parties have ignored this issue. We're going to be doing a series of papers in the summer that shows how we can deal with the fiscal cliff problem, how we can make our tax system fair, and how we can have the revenue to keep the state doing what it should be doing, and in addition, doing what it's not doing, but must be doing in the future if we're to have a economically successful state and a state that treats its citizens decently and fairly. But right now, with this budget at stake, is not a time to be dealing with the larger issues of the budget. Now's the time to pass a budget, draw down the surplus, and meet the critical needs we have in the 3 areas we're going to be talking about today. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jeff, and we will get into those 3 areas.
Thanks so much, Mark. Again, folks, your lines are muted. If you have a question for Mark or for any of our presenters, please type it in the chat. We'll get to as many of these as we can. I don't see any in the chat at the moment, Mark. So on that note, we will go and talk a bit about education, and we're really pleased to hear from Susan Spicka. Susan.
Hi there. Delighted to be here today and so happy to see so many people engaged in the state budget fight because it's so important this year. So I'm with Education Voters of Pennsylvania, and we work really hard to ensure that every public school in Pennsylvania will have enough funding to be able to give students the opportunities they need to be successful. So we are unabashedly pro-public education and anti-voucher. We are very excited about Governor Shapiro's proposed budget for education this year. I think everybody here probably knows back in February of 2023, Commonwealth Court declared Pennsylvania's school funding system unconstitutional. There are many school districts in the state that have been very underfunded because our state provides it's like the story that we tell for everything. The state provides a very small share of funding for public education, which means that communities are very reliant on property taxes to fund their local schools. There are some districts that are able to do that very well. They have a nice property tax base, and with small tax increases at the local level, they can fund their schools. There are many other communities that don't have a strong tax base, and no matter how much they raise their local taxes, they simply cannot provide the resources students need to succeed. So this problem has existed in Pennsylvania, and it has gotten worse and worse and worse. And so right now, we have our state legislature that is on board with fixing this unconstitutional school funding system. So last year in the budget, the state legislature approved of the first installment of what we call an adequacy payment that would be funding directed to the school districts. It is 348 out of 50, so it's about 70% of Pennsylvania's school districts that are unconstitutionally underfunded. And they said, what we're going to do is we can't do it all at once. There's a $4.5 billion gap. We can't do it all at once. So we're going to stretch this out over a series of years. They decided that the timeline was going to be 9 years. We think that's a little bit long, but in this world, we take what we can get. And so last year, the state legislature made its first installment of the adequacy funding to close the $4.5 million adequacy gap with a $494 million investment in the school districts that are unconstitutionally underfunded. And then they also invested about $200 million in basic education funding that went to all of Pennsylvania's school districts, because we know inflation hits all of us. And even if you are not unconstitutionally underfunded, if you are a school district, you're going to have increased costs. So we need to make sure that every school district in Pennsylvania can keep up with its increased costs. This year, Governor Shapiro proposed the second installment of the adequacy funding, an additional $494 million that would go to the unconstitutionally underfunded school districts. And then he did something kind of interesting. Many of you probably are aware of the fact that we have cyber charter schools in Pennsylvania. We have the largest cyber charter industry of any state in the entire nation, because Pennsylvania funds cyber charter schools with a completely irrational formula that allows them to kind of run away like bandits with all this excess funding. So we fund cyber charter schools that educate students at home on a computer the same way we fund the brick and mortar charter schools that educate students who are sitting in classrooms who have the full benefit of school buildings all day. It's a long story, but what we have seen over the years is that Pennsylvania's cyber charter industry has amassed enormous hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in excess tax funding that they have packed into bank accounts. And the Auditor General this year came out, he did an audit of 5 schools, and he found that they had packed $619 million, just 5 of Pennsylvania's 14 cyber charter schools, $619 million into fund balances with no reason to spend them, no plan to spend the money, which is just clear evidence in front of our eyes that these schools are very, very overfunded. So Governor Shapiro said, I recognize that we need both new funding for school districts in order to make sure that students have the resources they need to succeed, but we can also create some efficiencies in the budget, and we can make sure that we can finally make sure that the cyber charter tuition that school districts pay for a student who goes to a cyber charter school is actually connected to the amount of money it costs to give that kid an online education. So Governor Shapiro proposed a flat rate of $8,000 per student for a regular education student who's going to a cyber charter school. So with his proposal, school districts would save $278 million. And as you know, in your own budget, a dollar is a dollar. Someone can give you a new dollar to spend, or you can save a dollar on something, and that dollar then is available to be invested in something that is important for you. So Governor Shapiro's proposal is really smart in that it both increases funding where we really need it, a big increase in funding for the adequacy districts that are so far behind. But then for all 500 school districts, we create these efficiencies by allowing them to save close to $300 million just simply by reducing the amount of tuition that they send out to cyber charter schools. So if all of Governor Shapiro's budget as a package passes, school districts will end up being like in very, very, very good shape when we hit the fall. The one issue is that Governor Shapiro did not propose a robust amount of money for basic education and special education funding for the non-adequacy school districts. That small amount is not enough for them to keep up with inflation. So that we need the package to pass with cyber charter savings, about 300 million, and then about $100 million investment in basic and special education funding. And then that puts us together into like a very nice investment for all the school districts. And we have the House recently passed a bipartisan bill that will enact cyber charter reforms that go even further than Governor Shapiro proposed. And I put a little Action Network link in the chat. If you read that, then you can understand a little bit more about kind of like the world that we are in with cyber charter schools, where they're handing out fuel stipends and bonuses and buying cars for people and packing money in bank accounts and spending tens of millions of dollars on advertising, um, all at the same time that like they can't even spend the money that they have. So we are really excited about this education budget, and right now we are most focused at Ed Voters on getting the cyber charter school reform across the finish line, because that is what's going to make a difference for school districts the most, is being able to just decrease the amount of money that they have to spend and getting some efficiencies, rather than just forcing school districts to spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars to cyber charter schools where this money is just like wasted. So the Action Network link is there. And then we also have a special little group of people who are our cyber charter rapid response team. And we have some fun things planned for next week and the upcoming weeks. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for that too. And sorry, I didn't have any fancy slides, but I'm very happy to answer questions whenever anybody has them. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Yes, again, folks can submit questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of these as we can, but we do want to give time for each of our speakers. We're really pleased to have with us today from the Transit for All PA Coalition, Connor Descheemaker, who is the statewide campaign manager for Transit for All PA. Transportation funding is a big part of what's at stake in this budget. We're really pleased to have Connor here. Connor?
Awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation, Mark and Jeff, and it's a pleasure to be here with y'all. I'm gonna just get my screen all set up. All right, so can you see my main slide where it says Transit for LPA and a group of people? All right, awesome. I know there is gonna still be a border around it, but when I futz with that, it makes things worse. So just be patient with me. All right, awesome. So yes, as was mentioned, I'm the statewide campaign manager for Transit for All PA, and we are really a statewide network of transit riders and transit workers organizing for full and dedicated funding for public transportation. We have been sort of formally organized since 2021, when hundreds of riders and workers came together to build our platform in 2021. And since then, we've hosted petitions, led phone banks and town halls, papered every legislator 4 or 5 times over at this point, rallied in Harrisburg, and I can actually, that number is very outdated. I apologize, didn't update this slide. We're at close to 25,000 people in our network statewide. So really proud of the work we have been able to accomplish in the last few years. And I have only been here since, in this specific role, excuse me, since January. And I am the first dedicated staffer to statewide organizing. So. All right, so our core team, you can see these are just some of the organizations. This is who meets with us every week. Basically, there's a much larger group I'll get to next. Philly Transit Riders. Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to interrupt because it sounds like you've advanced to a different slide. You're talking about a list of groups. All we're seeing is the first slide, Transit for All.
Oh, very weird. Okay. All right, how are we looking now? Has the slide advanced?
Not yet, no.
Okay, one moment here. All right.
Ah, okay.
All right. I'm not sure what happened there. I'm so sorry, y'all. Thank you for the heads up, Jeff. All right. Well, that's the who we are slide. Now you can see it, everybody. Thank you for your patience. But yeah, here's some of our core organizing partners. Fifth Square, Pittsburghers Public Transit, Clean Air Council, Bicycle Coalition, Transit Forward Philadelphia, Philly Transit Riders Union, the Pennsylvania Downtown Center, and I'll also say that we work very, very closely with the ATUs all across Pennsylvania, and have been, there for most of the steps of our journey as well. Here is an example of some of the broader set of organizations that have signed on to our platform. You can see there's unions, there's community-based organizations, business associations, economic development groups, centers for independent living, and much, much more across Pennsylvania. So this is going to be our crucial starting place. People need to understand that the status quo is austerity and decline. Since COVID, every single transit agency, with the exception of Atlanta in the Lehigh Valley, has lost service. Everybody else is operating at lower capacity than they were in 2020. So when we hear folks talk about the fiscal cliff and we hear folks talk about things like the governor's budget proposal, people are working from a framework of managed decline even still. And so, we can see that, SEPTA is reaching its fiscal cliff soonest, along with PRT. And that is because they, put the least money away, basically, of transit agencies in terms of that COVID relief money that has now expired. A lot of these other agencies, one example that we've heard from some folks in the Center Area Transportation Authority, as well as in Luzerne and Lackawanna County, we're not going to hit our fiscal cliff for 5 or 10 years. Well, you can see on this graph here that that's because they've cut a whole hell of a lot of service already. And so rather than doing what the American Rescue Plan was designed to do and maintain services and grow them back, they really focused on putting money in the bank. And that's something that we can't afford as riders and workers across Pennsylvania. So here's the movement. Some of the individual actions that we have taken. So last year there was the governor's flex of federal highway dollars. That's something that reached national news, but it is only was enacted because of the failure of our Pennsylvania legislature. We started raising this alarm in 2023. There was a wave of momentum. I'll admit, too early last spring. That's didn't peak at the right moment. But as we saw that the legislature was gonna not take action in June, and then we're going into a presidential election. Why would they do major legislation then? We were organizing such that as soon as the last day hit, we launched a very elaborate game of telephone, telling people, have you heard about this cool trick called Federal Highway Flex? Have you heard about this cool trick to various planning agencies, regional planning commissions, governor's office, legislators, and then at the same time, mobilizing 3,000 folks to take action in just 10 days. We went from being told, you're crazy, that'll never happen, to action happening and buying us those extra 6 months of funding. Again, as I mentioned, we got nearly 25,000 people in our movement across PA. Our most recent things that I am proud to share are that we host monthly smaller systems working groups where we are explicitly organizing people from outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We've got a consistent set of folks that attend those every month in the 2 to 3 dozen range. And I can say that overall, we've got about 1,400 contacts that are outside of the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh regions because transit operates in every county. And most proudly, last Wednesday, we gathered 300 plus people. And those are just a small array of the communities where we organized transportation, carpools, buses, and trains from all over the state to join for a rally on the Capitol steps, where we also papered every legislator's office and met with 9 Republican legislators from outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with their constituents there present to show them that this is not about a Philly or Pittsburgh bailout or anything like that, but this is something that affects everybody. Right. So our plan, again, rider and worker organizing and responsive demands. I don't need to go over any more of the stats, but those responsive demands, it's worth noting that we've heard what our legislators are talking about. Rep. McNeil in the Lehigh Valley proposed a grant program because in Lehigh Valley, as their population is growing rapidly and their economy is growing rapidly, they need more transit than they can afford to, install, basically. And then at PennDOT's budget hearings, Reps. Macco and Nelson explicitly asked about the distribution of the Public Transportation Trust Fund. So that means we're talking about, again, trying to grow service, even past those 2020 levels for small and mid-sized agencies. 4 planks in our funding proposal that is now introduced in both the House and Senate. So we started with goals. We want to restore to 2019 service across Pennsylvania, but for areas that are not SEPTA and PRT, we want a 10% increase, even above that. We recognize that, again, even those pre-COVID levels of service were not adequate for our communities. We also want local control for transit fare enforcement, local enabling legislation so that we can levy local taxes and fees so that we can even attract those federal capital dollars that we currently don't even qualify for. And we want to ensure that our money is being used responsibly. So we want a project prioritization framework for PennDOT, because when we have these huge state of good repair deficits for our transit systems, as well as these huge conditions of our roads and bridges that are poor, why are we building new highways and expanding them? We need to focus on in maintaining the infrastructure that we have. So with that in mind, we can sort of compare where these proposals are going. Agencies need $384 million in new funding to meet their current service needs without using reserves. That's just in year 1, so starting July 1st. Governor Shapiro has proposed $292 million in new funding. And I want to make explicit, all agencies except SEPTA would be projected to still cut service even with the Governor Shapiro proposal. This is something that is a Band-Aid. It is something that'll get us, 6 months, a year, 2 years, something like that. So SEPTA gets the most out of it, and they only get 5 years. And at that point, they will have run their reserves to 0. So this is not, very fiscally responsible, if you will. So that's why with those goals that I had established on the last slide, we have set a goal of $485 million. This would restore service to 2019 levels and add 10% of service to all agencies except SEPTA and PRT. That sounds like a lot of money, but let's put it in perspective. The amount of money from PennDOT that goes to transportation is very low, under 20% of its total allocation. We're in a position where there's, billions of dollars in these major infrastructure programs, that are available. So again, what we're proposing, get out of the general fund. We really want something that's dedicated. And the funding mechanisms that are in this proposal are the car rental tax, the car lease fee, and TNC fees statewide. So the car rental and car lease, they already go to the Public Transportation Trust Fund. They haven't been touched in 35 years. And they are comparatively, surprisingly for leases, that is something that is disproportionately used by high-income individuals. And car rentals are something that is largely a discretionary expense. TNC fees, there are statewide TNC fees in Kentucky, but there are not statewide TNC fees in Pennsylvania. So this is not a wild blue state priority. This is something that is just paying your fair share, because aside from the Philly metro area, Uber and Lyft, that's what TNCs are, sorry, transportation network companies, ride shares, they do not provide accessible transportation. And so we believe that these companies should be paying their fair share so that there is accessible transportation like our shared ride services that are public transportation, everywhere. And so in terms of taking action, I'll ask Stephen, if you could put the transitforallpa.org/take action link in the chat. All of this information is going to be, found on that Take Action page. We have issue coalitions that have been stood up sort of parallel to us, focused on disability and human services. We have that monthly small systems working group. I bring that up because we are a statewide group here today. The next edition of that is on 6/24. And then we've got legislator visits where folks can, meet with, guides for that. So on that Take Action page, you can find graphics, you can find phone scripts, you can find a letter to the editor guide so that you can, publish something in your local media sources. But there's lots of ways that folks can make your voices heard, with right at the top, a super simple letter campaign. We know that's the bread and butter of a lot of this kind of organizing. And if that's all you have capacity to, that's a great place to start, because it'll, reach out to leadership and your local legislators. That is all that I have got. And I will stop sharing and open it up to questions.
Thanks so much, Connor, and thank you, Stephen, for dropping that information in the chat there. Stephen is with Transit Forward. We're going to hear from our fourth and final speaker, and then we'll take some questions at the end. We are really pleased to have with us today the Deputy Director at Better Pennsylvania, our friend and colleague, Gillian Kratzer, is going to be talking about the minimum wage and how it's long past time to give folks a raise in Pennsylvania. Gillian.
Absolutely. Thank you. So excited to talk about this. There is a lot going on. So, with that, the minimum wage in PA, everything you need to know. So let's talk first where we're at right now. Okay. So, it's a mad rush of bills. I'm sure many of you know Pennsylvania hasn't raised the minimum wage in 16 years. Currently, there are 3 minimum wage bills at various stages in the House. And there might be a 4th bill coming from the Senate. So first, we have HB 1549. That is a bill introduced by Representative Jason Dawkins. It has passed the House on final consideration. That was yesterday, and it will go on to the Senate. But it seems like the Senate majority is not necessarily interested in taking that up. We'll see. This is what that bill looks like. So it's a little complicated, but if you're a first-class county, that's just Philadelphia. Year 1 of the bill would be $15 an hour, and then every year after that would be a cost of living increase chained to the consumer price index. That's what CPI is. If you are a second A and third class county, it would be year 1 11, year 2 13, year 3 15, year 4 COLA increases. And that is Allegheny County, Bucks, Berks, York, most of the collar counties, I believe also Erie. So if you are any of the rest of the counties, 4th through 7th class, it's year 1 10, then 11, then 12, then COLA increases. So that is HB 1549. The next bill is HB 1150. That's a bill from Ronnie Green. It was introduced and referred to the Labor and Industry Committee, and that's as far as it's gotten as of this moment. This is what her bill looks like. It would increase the standard minimum wage, the non-tipped minimum wage, to $15 an hour on year 1 statewide. And then in year 2 and beyond, there would be cost of living increases, change to CPI. And the tipped minimum wage would increase incrementally every 6 months for 3 years, until 3 or 4 years, until it reaches $15 an hour. Once it reaches $15 an hour, that would also get cost of living increases. It additionally includes something called preemption, which you can also call local wage control. So that's kind of a little bit easier way to understand it. And so currently in Pennsylvania, a municipality or county can't independently increase the minimum wage. Okay, so this is what this part of the bill would do. This bill would lift that ban, allow municipalities to independently increase the minimum wage above the state level, not below, just above, in the same way that the state can increase the minimum wage above the federal level. So the other two, the other kind of 1.5, if you will. There is a minimum wage bill from Chris Rabb. It hasn't been introduced yet, so it doesn't have a number. In the memo attached to the bill that has gone out, it says that it would abolish the tip minimum wage, would take steps towards local wage control, and update the definition of employee, like to be more inclusive, likely. On the Senate side, Senator Devlin Robinson, who's the chair of the Senate Labor and Industry Committee, has asked Senator Laughlin to introduce a minimum wage bill. Senator Robinson said he would have a hearing on the minimum wage a year ago. He has not had one yet. So I think we can all be rightfully skeptical of that. So what are we doing, right? And it depends on which part of this you are most interested in. So the two main priorities here are a flat statewide minimum wage increase and preemption or local wage control. If tiered is what we can get, that's what we can get, but wasn't a thing that anybody was like really hype about. And then obviously they all include cost of living increases. So that's not something that, we're very concerned about until we see what, if anything, the Senate puts out. But if the biggest deal is a flat statewide minimum wage increase, then for right now, we're mostly keeping our eyes and ears open and tracking what's going on, because there is a lot of action that will happen, especially at the end of this month when we're getting towards, fingers crossed, having a budget. If local wage control is your bigger priority, then there are accountability campaigns to push the House to pass a minimum wage bill that includes preemption. And so, those two priorities are not necessarily competing priorities. We can have them both, I think. But, in terms of the one, there's a lot of sort of intel gathering and talking to folks to be done. In terms of the other, there's a lot more in terms of accountability, because a bill has passed that, while that has a tiered system that does not allow counties or municipalities to independently adjust the minimum wage. So how do we talk about this? Because there's a lot of like nitty gritty going on. So the answer is that we're going to say the same things that we should always be saying about the minimum wage. We're raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That would lift over 2 million Pennsylvanians, above what they're currently making. It would be hugely impactful. 80% of the people making less than $15 an hour are adults. They're not teenagers. This is not a summer job issue. These are adults, many of whom have families to take care of. And every state bordering Pennsylvania has raised their minimum wage, all of them, including West Virginia. Not to cast shade on West Virginia, but additionally, I will say on a personal level, Ohio has a higher minimum wage than us. As a Western Pennsylvanian, cannot abide, won't do it. And then also a majority of states have raised the minimum wage, and wages and job growth have increased in the most affected industries. So, we often hear like, oh, this will be bad for jobs. Oh, so many people go out of business. Incorrect. And again, raising the minimum wage would put billions with a B dollars back into Pennsylvanians' pockets. And that money goes right back into our local economies, because, I can tell you right now that I make above, $15 an hour, obviously. But if I got a raise, that money would go right back into the economy, because I have things I could spend it on, right? And the same goes for most normal people, right? And so that is a benefit to the people who are getting a raise. That is a benefit to the Pennsylvania economy. That is a benefit to us broadly, because it means more revenue, which means more funding for services like transit and education, among others. And so I do want to cover for a second what we don't say, because this is really important. So I hear these on a semi-regular. So number one, $15 isn't enough. I know it's not. I'm well aware that it's not. You're well aware. We all know. You know how we know? It's because we've been fighting for 15 for like 10 years or more. So yes, Given both inflation and corporate greed, the minimum wage should be well higher than that. But what has waiting for the perfect wage gotten us so far? Nothing. So we have to do something. And if we can get 15, that's fantastic. That's basically, that's like slightly more than a 50% raise for a person making $7.25 an hour. And then frankly, again, that would result in raises for 2 million Pennsylvanians. So that's far from nothing. Well, the Senate isn't going to. We know who's a majority in the Senate, and they have not been historically terribly actually interested in raising the minimum wage. Okay, fine. But what we have to do is focus on pushing forward and continuing to hold people accountable, because focusing on what somebody or somebody else is not going to do is like not actually going to be super helpful for us in reaching our goal. Lots of businesses are already paying $15 or above the minimum wage. When I hear this one, it makes me have a little aneurysm. Because so what? If they pay more than the minimum wage, is there anything stopping them from decreasing salaries? There's not. And they could absolutely, and there are businesses that will not necessarily decrease wages for existing employees, but depending on what they think the market looks like, they will decrease start rates for newer employees, which creates, of course, all kinds of inequalities in their workplaces and then broadly. And just really, we have to bring the floor up. It doesn't matter if, oh, but I know that this place and this place and this place are all paying more fairly. That's great for them, but not everybody is. And we got to get to everyone. And yes, I know all those things may seem very, very obvious to you, because you're on a Penn policy, state policy call. So I kind of figure that you guys know what's going on a little bit, right? But like, here's the thing. Literally, Seth Grove said this week, but like he debated two experts. I'm going to put experts in quotes because I question that. How many people actually make $7.25 an hour? And like, is that the point? I don't think that's the point. Because the larger point is that we wanted to go to 15. And there are tons of people that don't make 15. It just needs to go up. And we should not be focused on this kind of talking point. We should be thinking about what's moving the conversation forward. Hang on, sorry. I hope nobody heard that. Kneecap just started playing in my earbuds or in my headphones. Okay, so that, oops, I should have stopped sharing first. My bad, guys. I can't find the button. Oh, there it is. All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Gillian. Really kind of sobering looking over, kind of the large numbers of people who really are impacted by low wages. I think it's kind of shocking to realize that while it's been, since 2009, since there was an increase in the minimum wage in Pennsylvania, it's actually been since 2006 since our General Assembly actually raised that.
That's correct.
Our minimum wage only went up in 2009 because the federal government wouldn't let Pennsylvania continue to pay people less than that. So, it has been 19 years since they passed something like this in the General Assembly. That's long past time. So I'm looking here. We had a number of comments folks made in the chat. One question I'm going to drop in here, and I'm putting something in the chat here. It was in some of the promotional stuff we sent out about this meeting. there's an article in Spotlight PA earlier this week that kind of asked the question, will there be a budget completed by the start of the fiscal year at midnight on July 1st? In part, one of the big factors here is that, we have this looming, I wouldn't even say threat. We know that there will be some pretty significant and brutal cuts coming from the federal government. It's not even clear yet exactly what the extent of that is going to be, and that is one of the complicating factors. So let me get to my question then. So my question is, we often have a mostly on-time budget in the state. The last number of years, we've maybe not had it on July 1st, but we've had it by, a week or two into the fiscal year. It's been a number of years since we had a prolonged standoff. So I guess my question is, what are you hearing? What do you think are the prospects that we will have a more or less on-time budget, or that we could have one that, I've even heard some talk about they may even wait until like September till they know what's coming from the federal government to do this. So that's my question is, do you think we'll see a budget coming together? And if we don't have one relatively close to on time, what are going to be the impacts on the folks that you're focused on? I'm going to turn it to any of our panelists here. Let me start first with Mark. Mark, what are your thoughts on that? Think we get an on-time budget?
I don't know. I think it's probably unlikely it'll be right on time because it just hasn't been right on time for the last couple of years. Question, is it going to be in July or is it going to be in September? If it's in September, they may pass some kind of temporary short-term budget and then fill it out in September. I don't think there's a good reason to delay. They're going to make the same deal now that they'll make in September. I know there's some talk that because of the uncertainty about the federal budget, they can't make a smart decision right now. I don't really think that's true. While, as many of you know, we've been working very intensely to try to stop this budget reconciliation bill. Most of the things that in that budget reconciliation bill that are particularly dangerous for our state budget won't take effect for a couple of years. Some of them will, and that may require some changes in the state budget at some point, but the state is able to take actions to adjust the state budget in light of what the federal government does with its budget. And we may not know until September or even October what the federal budget is going to look like, because it's not just a reconciliation bill, there's appropriations bills that have to be passed, and they typically are delayed as well. So there's no good reason to delay. If it is delayed, it's because Democrats and Republicans can't reach an agreement and think that they get some political benefit from blaming each other over the summer.
Thanks, Mark. Any of our other panelists want to chime in on this, and maybe even more so, like what would be the impact if there was a long one? Gillian, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that we will get something roughly in time. If I were a betting person, I would say that the House will pass it on time and the Senate will pass it the week after, so that the majority in the Senate can say that Governor Shapiro didn't get the budget done on time. And then, but the scary impacts, right, and I'm certain that Susan can speak to this, is school funding, because that becomes very problematic when schools have to do their budgets. I mean, obviously it's bad for everybody, but that's like a particular worry.
Yeah, like so we have the really upside down and backward policy where school districts have to pass their budgets before the state passes their budgets. So they have to like guess. But the problem we run into in the fall is if it's a prolonged standoff, none of the money flows to school districts. So it flows to a lot of people. I believe the money flows to lawmakers to pay their salaries, but it does not flow to school districts. And so the school districts that are the most underfunded may not have the reserves that they need, and they may not have the property tax collections that they need to meet payroll. So a few years ago, when we had this prolonged budget standoff, these districts had to go out and get very expensive lines of credit to be able to pay their bills, and then they had to pay the interest on the lines of credit, and then it just dug them deeper into a hole. And I think for all of us, like the not having predictability and being able to plan is so destructive, right? I'm sure for transit, like they need to be able to plan. And if they just know what they have, they can plan for it. But when they can't plan, it is just so, I'm handing it over to you, Connor. That's horrifying. That transit, I didn't even really fully understand the extent of how terrible that is.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan, and great tee up. I think a thing that I didn't articulate as well as I should have is that uh, we're looking at doubling of the fares for people who use paratransit service in the most rural counties of Pennsylvania. Like that's the kind of crisis that we're talking about here. And so when we see things like a particular email that was sent by a particular state senator that some folks might have seen circulating on the internet, and it just talks about a personality conflict with the now former SEPTA general manager, that is incredibly tone deaf when his own constituents are asking him for transit, funding. But when we talk about the consequences, SEPTA's cuts are going to go into effect in August, and PRT's cuts are going to go into effect in August. And as another set of cuts in addition to that for both of those and other agencies, that'll go into effect on January 1st. So there needs to be something. I am hopeful that there will be something that gets us, but I'll be honest that I don't think that all of our problems are going to be solved by around July 1. Or even December 31st for that matter for transit. I think we're going to need to keep fighting for a comprehensive and long-term funding solution, for a while.
Well, this is a lot to think about, and just listening to each of the four of you kind of responding to this and what some of the impacts would be of a prolonged standoff or, not getting the kinds of investments that we need. There seems to be like a lot of interrelationship on some of these issues that is going to hit people in ways that we haven't thought, like, significant cuts to public transit, which gets a lot of our students in Pennsylvania to their schools. That impacts education. People who are not earning enough money to be able to afford these increases in public transit funding, are people who are probably not making $15 an hour. So I think that while the problems are interconnected, I think the solutions are also interconnected too. That we absolutely have to stand together and fight for all of the priorities that we need. And these are just some of the important priorities that face us in our state budget, because the budget is less than just a series of numbers on paper. It's really about our priorities and about our values, and what it says about who we are and what we want to see in the kind of place that we want to live in. Connor, go ahead.
If I can hop in quickly to say, like, that is really the crux of what we've been talking about here. We can't let the folks in the Southeast just say like, the governor's proposal will get us a couple of years. That's fine. That is not a place we can be working from. And also we can't be distracted by saying, well, are you going to say that transit's more important than education or something else like that? I think these kinds of choices are like so scarcity minded and like just short-sighted. And so that's why, anytime that I even get I'm sure the other advocates in this room get this all the time. You'll get a text or a phone call from some legislator saying, well, can you put in the ear that this policy might be the thing? Da, 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 da. No, I'm going to keep fighting until there's full funding for everybody. Like, we need a deal. And I don't want to get lost in the fights about the this and that mechanisms. We're going to present a vision of abundance. And that's why we created a funding proposal, because before, the ceiling was the governor's proposal. Last year, the ceiling was the governor's proposal. Now we can raise that ceiling. And there was a bill that was just passed literally yesterday with a ceiling higher than the governor's proposal. So our fight is working. It just is going to take time to continue to raise that ceiling over the long term by, like, again, presenting these abundance visions and saying no, full for all of our issues.
If I can just jump in for a second, I want to second that and say, look, we have plenty of possibilities for raising revenue. I totally agree with Transit for All PA's idea that we should have dedicated funding for transit, but we also need general funding for all the other priorities, for roads, for bridges, for higher education, for K-12 education, for environmental protection, where we spend far less than we did 15 years ago. And the money can be raised. We have a totally upside down revenue system that in which people at the bottom pay at 2.5 times the rate people at the top as a share of the total state and local income. If we just ask the richest people in Pennsylvania and the corporations whose taxes have been cut repeatedly to pay their fair share, we can deal with the coming fiscal crisis and have the money we need to create a prosperous society for all of us. And what really is disturbing to me is that, some exceptions aside, we don't hear people who claim to be our political leaders advancing that vision for our state. We need to start holding them up, holding them to our demand that they give us that vision and campaign at that vision and see how people in Pennsylvania respond positively to it.
Thanks, Mark. I'm looking at the time here. We do try to wrap these up by 2 p.m. I want to note, that we've had a lot of things we've talked about here today. We've talked a little bit about the overlap and some of the connections, and we are heading into some critical weeks here for Pennsylvania the next few weeks. As I listen to all of you, my thought of kind of a takeaway from this, or maybe a piece of advice or something to remember, is that we are all in this together. Regardless of what the issue is that we're fighting on. We're all in this together. I'm going to go to our panelists and see, Mark, we just heard from already, but Gillian, Susan, Connor, 1 or 2 sentence piece of advice, pep talk, marching order, something you would like folks to take with them from this meeting.
Yeah, I think just things can get overwhelming. If you need to pick a couple things to work on, that's okay, because there's a lot of us and not all of us are going to pick the same things. So, and drink water, be hydrated.
I think that there's a lot that's going on with the federal government that's really, really hard, and that the victories we can have in Pennsylvania with the state budget this year are enormous, right? We have a huge opportunity to get great things for a lot of people in Pennsylvania, and we all need to just be, as I like to say, pedal to the metal until they get that thing signed and on off Governor Shapiro's desk. We need to stay engaged in whatever little piece you have. And I agree, pick one little thing and focus in on that, and just be like a freaking dog with a bone and don't let it go until your piece gets until you get what you need.
That's, yeah, beautifully stated, both of you. It is, that's the beauty of organizing, is the trust that if you are focusing on your issue, there is someone that working on the other issue. And just being in communication when you can. I owe Gillian a call because they texted me earlier this week, and that is the kind of power that comes in this kind of a space where we can really just be working together. And like Susan said, this is First Transit, I can say this is an entirely statewide manufactured crisis with an entirely statewide solution. The federal government is actually not allowed to fund public transportation operations except for rural agencies serving populations of under 50,000. So this is something where we can say, hey, you want to win? Let's win. We can do this.
Well, thank you so much to all 4 of you for really providing some helpful context and some really crucial information and helping us to make these connections. Thank you, Mark, Gillian, Susan, Connor. Thanks also to Stephen Bronskill and Adrian Stanley, who also helped out with today's meeting, and the comms team at Pennsylvania Policy Center. We will be coming back in July. Our first Thursday of the month Zoom meeting at 1 o'clock is our federal policy one. We will have a lot of updates, I'm sure, on federal priorities when we come back in July. And then we'll be back to the 3rd Thursday in July at 1 p.m. for this state policy action Zoom meeting. Hopefully, we'll be able to get together and celebrate some victories in our state budget battle. But we will see. Stay tuned. Follow us on social media. Again, thank you to everybody for your time today. Have a great one.